Hello, time then for the press preview. It's our first look at tomorrow's front pages. We're going to check out the headlines tonight with the senior associate editor at the New Statesman, Rachel Cunliffe and Anita Boateng, who's a former Conservative special advisor. They're going to be with us from now until just before midnight. Very good evening to both of you. We'll chat after we've had a look at some of those front pages. For Saturday, on the front of the Times is the headline, "Chaos reigns in France as the King and Queen consort's trip is postponed because of those protests over pension reforms." While the Telegraph says the UK's reset with the EU is in disarray as His Majesty's visit is stopped for now. Royal tour axed over safety fears is the headline in the Daily Express, while the postponed state visit also makes the front of the Daily Mail. The Guardian carries a warning from school leaders who say the brutal Ofsted regime is driving them to quit. The German Chancellor has expressed confidence in Deutsche Bank after the company's shares fell sharply. That's on the front of tomorrow's FT. While the Mirror has the story of a man who went to Ukraine for dental treatment after being unable to get an appointment with an NHS dentist. And finally, the Daily Star is claiming that half-baked baguettes could be blamed for a global stink crisis. And we're joined tonight by Rachel Cunliffe and Anita Boateng. Good to see you both. Let's start with the front page of the Times, shall we, Anita? Actually, this is my favourite headline of all the stories about France. Chaos reigns in France.
Yes, and the photo on the front page of the Times is quite extraordinary. So I would urge all your listeners to scan and have a quick look. And so, yes, this is a story about the protesting that is taking place in Paris and has done so for quite some time as a result of Macron's decision, his flagship policy to effectively raise the state pension age in France from 62 to 64. As a reminder for British viewers, in the UK, it's about 66. So I think we'd be delighted to be at 64. And so as a result, you've got bin men protesting, you've got lots of protests on the streets, and it's been so disruptive following Macron's decision to effectively use his powers rather than the powers of Parliament to pass the legislation. Many feel that he's acting like he's almost like a king, which is quite ironic because this event has meant that the king in the UK, who was scheduled to visit France, is no longer going to be coming. So quite a dramatic series of scenes, and no sign that the protests are going to abate just yet.
No, and it's the same theme on the front of the Telegraph, Rachel. UK reset with EU in disarray. The workers are revolting in France and the monarchy suffers. And the sad thing about it is that it was all meant to be a sort of celebration, wasn't it, of Anglo-French relations after what has been quite a stressful few years.
It was, yes. Now, I'm not sure to what extent I buy the Telegraph's framing of this, because that headline makes it look a little bit like it's the UK that's in disarray here, or the UK that's going to suffer as a result of this this planned state visit not being able to go ahead. And you're absolutely right that it was meant to be a celebration. It was the first state visit that King Charles was going to make to another country. And it was going to be a real symbolic, ceremonial example of how the UK and France were back on good terms after a couple of years where we had some prime ministers who said some not very nice things about them. And it is disappointing that that's not going to happen. However, if it's embarrassing for anyone in this scenario, it very much is France. Macron wanted the visit to go ahead, and for France as a country to say, yeah, we don't think that we can host the British King because we can't confirm, we can't be certain that there wouldn't be security concerns, that he would be safe, because our political situation, our rioting situation is so explosive at the moment that we just can't make those kinds of commitments. That really doesn't reflect well on Macron, who very much sees himself as a statesman on the global stage. I mean, you've got the footage there. We've had quite a lot of protests in the UK ourselves in recent months. We've had quite a lot of strikes, and then you look at the footage in France and go, yeah, they really know what they're doing over there. They make our protests look pretty pathetic, don't they?
Yeah, and I've been out there to cover the protests from time to time, and they certainly are extremely organised. They know what they're doing. And when we talk about the issues involved, Anita, and Rachel touched on it there, Macron really hasn't necessarily communicated very well his reasoning behind raising the retirement age from 62 to 64. And when you look at other European countries, here in the UK, obviously 66, Germany and Italy 67, Spain 65, why is he so determined, do you think, to push on with this?
Well, his argument, and this is something that has sort of bedeviled French presidents for almost a decade now, and even longer, because raising the state pension age is one of the big political battles in France, because there is this concern that effectively the pension system will bankrupt the country. And that is Macron's broad argument. And he sees himself as being a kind of great reformer. And this is very much a kind of flagship a policy that's going to, in his mind, move France onto a kind of sustainable footing and bring it more in line with the rest of the Western world when it comes to the retirement age. But I think the way that he's gone about this in particular, and the fact that he's effectively, he lost his majority with his party in Parliament, and as a result of that couldn't get this legislation through, and then decided to use his constitutional powers to make this happen. And I think that there are many who see Macron as being someone somewhat of a kingly figure in how he does politics, and it's very much about him, even though it strictly is a presidential system. And so I think some of the ways in which the protest has been reignited, because the protests were sort of dying down in Paris over this issue, has definitely been inflamed once more by the way he's gone about this, not seeking that parliamentary agreement, but instead deciding to use his powers. Nevertheless, as Rachel says completely, that this is an embarrassment for France, and particularly an embarrassment for Macron, partly because I think not just because of the concerns about the king's safety were he to have visited, but also I think the optics of him sort of, I presume, sipping champagne in Versailles whilst rioters were on the streets wouldn't have been perhaps the best message for France.
Yeah, would you agree with that, Rachel?
Definitely. The optics do not look good. It's been referred to as a potential Marie Antoinette moment. Macron basically going, let them eat cake while rubbish is piling up in the streets and people are rioting over the pension age, and he's off in Versailles having a state banquet with the King of England. I can see why it's not a particularly good look. There was another embarrassment for him when he was caught on camera taking off a very, very expensive watch so that he wouldn't have it on when he was on TV, although obviously that clip was released. So this idea that he is not a man of the people, that he is elitist, that he is very arrogant because, as Anita says, he has bypassed Parliament in this way, even if what he's trying to do is safeguard France against the impact of an ageing population, which is something that all Western countries are grappling with at the moment. It's a very sensible reform, but the way he has gone about it in a country that has a real history for industrial action and for lively protest has had quite severe consequences for him politically and also for this much heralded state visit.
It was very odd, that footage, wasn't it, where his sort of hand disappeared under the table, and then when it came back he wasn't wearing his watch. Very weird. OK, let's move on then. Also on the front of the Telegraph, and in fact she's on a number of the front pages, Gwyneth Paltrow. She is currently giving evidence in trial over this ski collision that happened in 2016 at a very posh Utah ski resort. Anita, what do you think of her evidence so far?
I think that she has a habit of pulling one particular pose where she slightly tilts her head to the side and thins her lips, and it's exactly what I do when I hear someone say something that I'm really tired of. And I think you can tell throughout this entire thing that she doesn't want to be there. She doesn't think it's necessary. It seems like the sums, she's countersuing for $1, he's suing her for $300,000. The sums are relatively trivial, and therefore this seems like quite a lot of a circus over a small amount of money. And I think she's made the point that she feels if she weren't famous, that this wouldn't have gotten to this stage. I must say, I don't know how I feel about the fact that America routinely televises all its trials like this, because I honestly couldn't imagine anything worse. But she seems to be, I don't know, bearing up okay.
Yeah, that evidence ongoing, Rachel, and she does look pretty tired and pretty fed up about the whole episode, because it has been going on for a long time now, a number of years.
Yeah, it's been going on for years over what, as Anita just said, are relatively small amounts of money. And on the one hand, it's almost certainly the case that he wouldn't be suing her were she not famous. Or, I mean, you don't sue someone for $300,000 unless you think that they have $300,000. But we have also had quite a few revelations in the last couple of years of celebrities who perhaps don't always behave in the most appropriate way and think that their celebrity status will protect them from ordinary consequences. She just got asked just before we came on air by the opposition lawyer whether she inquired whether he was okay after the skiing crash, and she had this line that was sort of, when you've been in a crash psychologically, you don't always feel in a space to inquire after the person who caused the crash, which just feels like it could have been a line from a TV series that she was in or something like that. But I agree with Anita when she does that look, which you saw her on screen a second ago, that sort of head to one side, the really. I do find that quite convincing. She's got the look nailed down, but then she is an award-winning actress.
Yeah, and apparently her children are going to give evidence next week as well. And let's finish on this very sad story and the ramifications of it. The head teacher who took her own life because of the Ofsted report that was going to downgrade her school, Anita. What do you think of the way schools are judged? Does it work? Does it need to be changed?
Well, I know, and my sister is a teacher, and I think that the way that Ofsted can strike fear into the hearts of teachers, I think, is underappreciated, and the stress that it puts teachers and pupils under, is no mean feat. I think that it's an imperfect regime, and I think it's probably the best we have in the face of alternatives. But I definitely think there is no harm in Ofsted reassuring itself and obviously all of the teaching community that it's doing everything it can to provide an environment in which, like, they're genuinely assessing, but also, allowing schools to flourish and allowing teachers to continue to feel like they can teach and teach well.
Yeah, it's the sort of the unknown aspect, Rachel, isn't it? That's, I think, so stressful for teachers. You know, that phone goes and the inspectors will be there any minute.
And it really does seem to cause a huge amount of additional stress and panic and work in a sector that is already very much overworked. Part of me wonders whether the real problem here isn't Ofsted, because I think even teachers and head teachers in schools would agree that it's very important that schools are regulated and are checked up on, and that's really important for students and parents, and indeed for teachers. The real problem, I think, is that what is going on in our schools is that we have a massive teacher shortage. We know that teacher pay is a huge issue. They've been on strike this month. And increasingly, teachers in schools are being asked to pick up more and more what we normally call, I guess, social services that have been cut back on, or community services, dealing with kids who have mental health issues or have real problems at home, or who are living in poverty, and all of the other community services that you would expect to deal with those issues have been so radically scaled back, or not working, or demand is too high, that it falls on teachers in addition to sort of their teaching load. So I think there is real anger in the teaching community that Ofsted inspectors who just come in for a couple of days don't understand the conditions that they are working under, and just how much their workload has increased and their roles have expanded. There was real anger over Ofsted not making allowances when they went and did inspections sort of during lockdown or straight after in the pandemic, just what schools were having to cope with. And I think until we kind of realise that we're asking teachers to do a much greater expanded role than many of them ever realised when they signed up for the purpose of, teaching, that anger is still going to be there, and it's a really, really tragic case. We shouldn't read too much into the exact circumstances of that one woman's death, but we can have a conversation about what it is that we're asking teachers to do and whether or not it's sustainable.